Hello. Hello, everyone. How are you? Great. It's really great to be here. And before we start, I first want to thank AFI for giving me the opportunity to be here. As Alfred kindly mentioned during his opening remark yesterday, I was part of the AFI community from the beginning. And after many years to come back and see how strong the network has grown, the impact all of you as AFI members are making every day, and also the knowledge and the insights and the learning that you're sharing with your peers, with your partners in this vibrant network is really heartwarming for me to see. I also feel very special to be at the AFI GPF when it's organized by BSP, the Bangko Sentral Pilipinas. Not only because they were the first AFI members, but also because I made my first AFI friends from BSP. So thank you so much for that. I am SungAh, the Deputy Director General at IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature. So let me start by asking one question to all of you. Do you know what was so special last July? So July 2023? Can anyone guess? I think someone said it. Yeah. It's not a very positive one. It was the hottest month ever in the human history. Now we call global warming the global boiling. The world is facing enormous challenge with the climate change, biodiversity loss, environmental pollution. According to the IUCN Red List data, species are disappearing in a record high speed. The heat wave we've seen this year, the devastating flood, the wildfire, all the natural disasters that we have seen in the past is telling us one same thing, that we cannot continue like this anymore. If you think about the world GDP, more than 50% of the world GDP relies on nature, directly and indirectly. And yet, we are destroying nature every day. We need a transformative action. We need to transform the way we consume. We need to transform the way we produce. We need to transform the way we operate our economies and societies. And most importantly, we need to transform the way we make decisions, the way we make policy decisions, the way we make regulatory decisions. And all this towards a green transition. And within the green transition, finance and the financial sector is crucial, has a crucial role to play. The way we shape and design our financial architecture, the way we shape and incentivize the financial flow can enable green transition. And this is why I think many of you probably are aware, the Global Biodiversity Convention, the CBD, that took place last year, and the upcoming COP28, the Global Convention on Climate Change, one of the main agenda in both COPs are finance. And inclusive green finance can not only enable the green transition, but it can accelerate and encourage the green transition also to be a just transition. The green transition that we're all working towards has to be just, has to be equitable, and has to be inclusive. Yesterday, we heard a lot about leaving no one behind, and the green transition is the same. We should not leave anyone behind. And with these thoughts and background, I think we first have a video to watch. So let's watch the video first, and then we will continue with our conversation with the panels. Thank you.
Six o'clock afternoon, something a strike. Landslide the full town.
Mi posta anta por sing one volcano, one mi posta por sing one boom.
Time fire up, time full town, you like Ronald Paul.
Crony fly one time full town or San PC come and double me. Every coconut say you go to Markin. He pay everyone win no crown way program. I mean full town I may all coconut pay everyone wood all tree only move also quick.
All mama with the whole picking early run. Narside town, all mama with the whole picking early run.
Time where people are in full town, tandai pairap. Mi harem hatlo mi porok mi lelo wood lo sampis lo we mi karai. Mr. Karai mi no karai from when mi karai from all pupuplo mi. With them all people me from me cry with them all get hat me cry from never me look want something or say me happen never me look.
Mi fly lusum tu pari cacao, mo plantation block coconut. Kintiplo mi fly tu crown mi perem, carenium, sandalwood, mo same time tu carentaro. Carentaro mi fly lusum.
Some home house lo some lo mi fly crony perem.
Water sauce tu mi fly cat mi lus, mi tamets. What I try mo ino sabi come back.
Before I come pupuplo mi balay talem say water play you me never by sabi try. From him come out lo spring water no. The time we landslide him come out, iperem hit lo water. Make him say mi balay hat lo place and lo kasing water.
Lo pilih plumi fela, o elol fela li talk about plumi fela say. And we place plumi the only place where we should move him, amen. Give me stop the place I was there. Might one day, suppose it happens a crown come down, but you will move back again. We stop move also.
Te quel na ye ren goi te quel na ren wo te leng ba hu ren na hai ren van to ren di te quel lo ku.
Okay, so now I would like to invite our distinguished panelists here with me on the stage. Governor Ariff Ali from the Reserve Bank of Fiji, Chairman Bayarsaikhan Financial Regulatory Commission of Mongolia, Sarah Buitoni, Director at the Women's World Banking, and Roberto Luchangco, Senior Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer at Bank of the Philippine Island. Could you kindly join me on the stage? So while our panelists are taking their seats, we have a 4 quick question to the audience. So I think the screen is showing you the instruction. Let me try myself so I know how to do it. So if you go to the AFI event app, click this session. If you scroll down, it says polls, and click IGF Plenary Kickoff. And then you will see 4 questions. So if you can kindly answer these 4 questions, that would be great. So, do you see concrete climate change impacts in your country today? That's the first one. If so, have you seen MSMEs struggling due to these impacts? The third question, is your institution working on advancing access to green finance for MSMEs? And then the last one, is your institution working with inclusive green finance? So let's give 1 or 2 minutes for all of you to answer the question. Let me know when the poll results ready, so we can have a look together. Did you all manage to answer? Shall we see the result of the first question? If it's ready on the screen. Okay, I think it is there on the back. Let me see, okay. So do you see concrete climate change? Okay, big yes. Shall we see the second one? Do you see MSME struggling? Okay, so slightly better, 55% yes, 35 no. Shall we see the third one? Is your institution working? Okay, so I see more than half of you here is actually working on inclusive, no. This is the third one. This is your, yeah. Okay, is this the last one? Okay, this is the last one. Is your institution working on inclusive green finance? 65%. Okay, so we still have a little bit more to go, but that's where this temperature of this room is now. So thanks for answering all the questions. So now let's dive in to our discussion. So my first question I would like to ask the governor from the Reserve Bank of Fiji. So Reserve Bank of Fiji has been a champion in the AFI network on inclusive green finance, and you have also brought this agenda to the network. It would be great to hear from you, Governor. What are some of the interventions that the central banks and regulators are making to advance inclusive green finance for MSMEs?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to be on this panel. I like this theme at MSME in the face of climate change, how financial inclusion can tend the table. As an economist, I feel that, and we all know based on the data that we all have, the contribution to GDP is quite significant. And a small growth in the contribution or growth rate of the SME sector can bring about an overall growth in the GDP of the country. Before I dwell in the question that you posed, I have a few introductory comments. One is that I saw some of the, on the first question that there's some, at least 10% of the people here voted that they have not seen the impact of climate change on their economies. I'm willing to pay for the airfares to Fiji or to the region and come and see firsthand of how climate change is impacting Fiji. In the last decade, the number of cyclones and storms have more than doubled compared to any other decade. A number of settlements that are on the coastal areas have to be relocated. Rising sea levels in the Pacific is at least 4 times the global average. To bring some context into this question, I think one of the most important thing is we had a Category 5 cyclone that hit Fiji in 2016. As a result of that Category 5 cyclone, one third of a GDP was damaged. And it opened our eyes. And one of the things that the government did soon after that was brought in a legislation or act, Climate Act. This act gives the legal basis for Fiji's sustainable development. It also gives in some of the climate action ambitions for Fiji. In addition, the government also brought in a tax called Environment Climate Adaptation Levy, so a tax on large businesses. And the collection of funds from this, or revenue from this, would be then diverted into climate actions of those who are affected by climate change. Unfortunately, because of COVID, and where our GDP contracted by almost 20%, some of these taxes had to be re-looked at because of the impact of COVID. Just in terms of the initiatives that we have in climate change initiatives that Fiji has implemented, Fiji is a small country, the population of only 900,000, so the central bank takes a leading role. We use the convening power to bring about changes to the financial system or what we want to bring in. So in terms of access to finance, we have what we call a disaster rehabilitation and containment facility. So it's a facility where we have a pool of funds that the Reserve Bank has for entities that are affected by disaster. They're able to borrow from commercial banks or financial institutions with back-to-back financing from the Reserve Bank at concessionary interest rates. Currently, that interest rate is the maximum 3.99%. The other initiative that we had in terms of access to funds is that together with government, we have a credit guarantee scheme. We do not have a credit government or imports, exports substitution bank. We do not have an entity, a separate entity that is called Credit Guarantee Agency. The Reserve Bank takes on that role. So we manage loans that are given to SMEs with a guarantee of somewhere between 50 and 75%. Government guarantees these loans, the funds are with the Reserve Bank, and in the event the SME fails, the guarantee then kicks in, which we manage. The other initiative that we did with UNCDF and some private insurers is pilot a parametric insurance for SME farmers and fisheries. It started off in 2000 in 21, started with a few hundred. This has then increased to about close to 2,000 right now. And so this covers businesses that, and the parametric trigger point is rainfall. So if there's rainfall above a certain level, you'll be paid out 50%, 70%, or 100%. The first payout was early this year, based on some very heavy rain that we experienced. I've been told that the Indian government is supplementing funds from on this facility, so this will be now ramped up to close to 1,000. We're targeting about 10,000 MSMEs in the next couple of years. Two other initiatives that I would like to highlight. One is that with the French Development Agency and GGI, we are starting work on a project called Greening the Financial System. This project is based on the work that they have done in other regions, and this project is done in collaboration with not just Fiji, but other Pacific Islands in the region. And the last initiative that I just want to talk about is that just last week, as part of our National Financial Inclusion Strategy, we have signed a cooperative agreement with IFC for the development of a national green financial taxonomy and ESG guidelines, which I hope will lay the foundation for Fiji in the direction of developing green lending products and services for the MSME sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Governor. It's great to hear the different tools that you are all mobilizing to support inclusive green finance. Now, I would like to move to the chairman of FRC Mongolia. So I understand FRC Mongolia has been working to make green credit available for MSMEs. So it would be great to hear from you some examples, but also some main insights and lessons learned that you could share. And Chairman, if you can also add, we just also heard from the governor on the green finance taxonomy. I understand that Mongolia is also following the country's green finance taxonomy. And it would be great to hear how this is supporting the financial institutions to report on green finance. So the credit part and then the taxonomy would be great to hear from you.
So first of all, good evening, everyone. Thank you, SungAh. So it's actually pretty similar what we've been done through the years with Fiji. So anyway, first of all, I would like to express sincere gratitude to AFI and the Banco Central Filipino for organizing such an important event. So Mongolia is a unique example of private and the public international partnership to promote sustainable green finance with a decade-long experience involving various stakeholders. Because it's been like more than 10 years. What I say is that Mongolia is one of the 10 countries mostly affected by the climate change and the global warming. That's why on the policy side, Mongolia has been working diligently to establish key policy frameworks, sustainable finance, such as a green taxonomy, and just recently we adopted new SDG taxonomy, the financial roadmap, ESG disclosure guidelines, gender-sensitive financial sector policy frameworks, and the green bond frameworks, etc. The action plan, accordance with the finance roadmap, was developed to reach its objectives of creating favorable environment for sustainable finance development, incorporating green development in the budget, improving the climate risk management system, and promoting transparent and open reporting. Also, we are working to have an integrated green financial database. So FRC also has undertaken responsibility for taking policy measures to bring like 5% of NBFI's total loans into portfolio of green loans by the 2030. Accordingly, the FRC started receiving also the green loan reports aligned with the classification of green taxonomy as well in order to create integrated database of the green products. In order to diversify the green loan products creates legal framework for sustainable finance. The model guidelines on developing ESG risk management regulation was just recently approved by the Financial Regulatory Commission of Mongolia. Those lenders consider whether the applicant's product service meet the environmental and social governance standards and the criteria. It means environmentally friendly projects are more likely to take the loans. Additionally, same as in Fiji, we do have a credit guarantee mechanism. So the fund was established in 2012, offers support to MSMEs and the entrepreneurs who are lacking collateral while facilitating their access to the green loans under the government policy framework. In the upcoming period, the FRC committed to working incentives for NBFIs. NBFIs means like non-banking financial institutions involved in the providing green loans. These incentives may include adjustments in the regulatory measurements and the introduction of the more flexible performance criteria. That's the briefly about we've been doing and what's the expecting coming months. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, for sharing what Mongolia is doing. So we heard both from Fiji and Mongolia, and now let's zoom back a little bit, and I want to turn to Sarah. So if you think about now the global discussion that's happening on climate finance, on inclusive, on green finance, first, how do you see inclusive green finance fitting into this global conversation? And in particular, how do you see the gender perspective playing out in the global picture?
Thank you, and it's an honor to be here with these esteemed panelists, and thank you to AFI as well. The economic impacts of climate change are not gender neutral, and low-income women are among the most vulnerable to both sudden extreme weather events and longer-term climate impacts. This is due to pre-existing gender inequities and gender social norms. We know that women have limited mobility, limited access to resources, and limited household decision-making power. And on top of these challenges, women are still less likely than men to have access to financial security and stability that offers resilience and adaptation to economic shocks from climate change. So studies we know are increasingly showing the overlaps between financial inclusion and climate effects, and therefore the need for inclusive green finance. And yet, there's still been limited attention on quantifying the impacts or designing gender responsive or transformative policies and financial services to support women's role in climate mitigation, resilience, and adaptation. To date, just as the finance industry overall continues to design gender-neutral financial products, we see that conversations around climate change impacts similarly lack a holistic and integrated focus on gender. And as we like to say, when you design without women in mind, you design for men. This is why my organization, Women's World Banking, conducts research and works with financial service providers and partners to understand the needs of women and design solutions that specifically promote their security and prosperity. We also train regulators through our Leadership and Diversity program for regulators. I see the faces of many of our alumni here in the audience. And we work with regulators to design and implement evidence-based and women-centered policies that are aimed at closing the gap in financial inclusion. And many of these policies bring a focus on climate impacts and resilience through capability building, through climate disaster risk insurance products, and other interventions. Women's World Banking is also a gender lens investor. We, as an investor, require our portfolio companies to undergo in-depth and data-driven gender assessments. These result in a customized gender action plan, and they're followed by rigorous gender disaggregated data collection. This helps our companies and ourselves as an investor to understand the specific vulnerabilities that women face and to design solutions that make sure women are at the center as clients, as staff, and as leaders. And companies are held accountable for results. As of today, our second fund has 2 investments that have green financing. Bike Bazaar in India has a portfolio of loans for traditional two-wheelers, and they also have a portfolio for EV bikes. And fascinating to us is that the EV portfolio has 2 times the number of women as the regular portfolio, perhaps letting us know that women have a preference for electric vehicles. So there's an opportunity for intervention. Pula Advisors is an insurtech company that facilitates smallholder farmers, particularly women, to access agricultural insurance critical for their resilience and adaptation. So financial products, policies, and interventions must take into account the specific vulnerabilities that women face. And as you've rightly said in your introduction, otherwise we risk leaving them behind.
Thank you, Sarah. And it was interesting to hear your research perspective, but also the perspective as an investor and how you're shaping it. Now, I want to turn to Ariff. So your institution, I believe, have some impressive initiatives on MSME lending and green finance. So it would be great to hear from you some of the concrete examples that your institution is taking forward.
Yes, so thank you, SungAh, and thank you to AFI and my co-panelists here today for making me a part of this event. To address your question, let me start off first with the green finance side of it, and I think BPI has really been one of the leaders in the Philippine banking scene in terms of the way that we've latched on to overall sustainable financing, and really for us it really began with green financing, and this is something that we I guess in our minds really formalized in 2008 when we entered into a partnership with IFC to develop a sustainable energy financing team, which really was oriented towards increasing access to finance for energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. And this team has grown in terms of the scope of what they were doing, and in fact, at this point, you know, what was previously known as the Sustainable Energy Financing Team has broadened to become the Sustainable Development Financing Team, recognizing that there are other sustainable initiatives beyond green financing. But I think one interesting thing about this team is that they are focused not only on large-scale projects, but even on smaller-scale projects as well, and really kind of bringing this kind of expertise, the expertise that they developed, first in conjunction with the partnership that we had with IFC, but also through repetition of many different exercises of going through projects, and then developing a deeper understanding of what kind of financings, green financings work here in the Philippines, in the Philippine context, and basically working with MSMEs, and then really, I guess on the micro level, maybe a little less so, but on the SME level, really getting involved with them. So not just kind of the large solar farms or big projects, but even into much smaller applications. And I think this was very interesting, at least from my perspective, because when I took over oversight of that sustainable energy financing team at the time, in many ways, coming from a corporate banking background, I guess I was more oriented towards, spending your time on the bigger projects where in a sense, you get more impact, right? But what I started to recognize after working with the team over time was really that the larger scale projects had their own resources, right? And when you're doing, let's say, a multi-billion peso project, in the hundreds of millions of dollars, you can afford to hire your own consultants, you can afford to develop your own expertise. But it's really at the SME level where there's a desire to participate in these kinds of projects, or in your energy efficiency, or using renewable energy, but you don't have the resources to really bring in consultants of your own or to develop your own understanding of it. And I think the fact that the bank had a team that had that knowledge in-house, we had the technical consultants that we could bring to SMEs. It really, in a sense, broadened their access to green financing. And I think that's something that we at BPI are quite proud of, that we've been able to do this. And the SAF team has worked on in excess of, since its establishment in 2008, almost 400 projects covering over 250 billion pesos worth. And I think that's something that I think we're quite proud of, that we're able to reach not just that peso amount, but even in terms of the number of projects. And that was achieved by working with smaller entities that really needed our help.
Thank you, Eric. Maybe two follow-up questions. In terms of working with many small projects, I would guess there's the more transaction cost on your side. So how do you actually address that in terms of a business model perspective? That's maybe one. And second, we actually heard now from the different panelists, the different tools, the interventions the central banks and the regulators are making. From your point of view, what do you want to see more? What do you want to see the regulators are doing to help institutions like yours to go further in inclusive green finance?
Well, so to address the first question, how do we look at, in a sense, the additional expense that we incur, right, from having these technical consultants as resources that obviously we have to finance, and we realize that the SMEs may not be able to pay for it outright. But for us, in many senses, I think the way we look at it is that we may not be having or making these loans if we weren't able to provide these SMEs with the kind of technical know-how, with the assistance. And therefore, in that sense, that the income we get from these loans is incremental to us. And that helps pay for, obviously the added cost of having these technical consultants, of having to develop the expertise. But we view it as incremental business for us from that perspective. And then to get into your question on what would we like to see from the regulators. That's actually a good question. First off, before I get into what I'd like to see from the regulators, I do want to mention that we have been seeing support from the BSP in terms of green finance, and one concrete way that they've done that is including sustainable loans as eligible loans under certain mandatory lending requirements that the bank has to make. And the fact that they've included sustainability loans under that has allowed us to, be more aggressive in terms of what we're able to do. So there is some element of support that we're already seeing from our regulators. But obviously, there's always more that can be done. And I think one of the things, and then I think this was kind of got into a little with some of the prior discussions, is I guess support on the taxonomy, right? And so basically the definitions of how to look at green financing and what qualifies as a sustainable loan will help us from our perspective. I mean, if you say yes, sustainable loans are qualified in terms of certain mandatory lending requirements that we need to make, let's have a clearer definition and a more uniform definition of what qualifies, right? Because we may think, hey, this qualifies, and another bank, it may be less clear to them. But in order to put us all on an equal footing, I think that clearer definitions would help, and especially if these were aligned with international definitions. And I know that even internationally, there's not one global standard for this, but as close as we can get to what are becoming kind of global norms, I think that will be helpful, because I have to admit that Philippines is probably not the leading edge in terms of sustainable thinking or development. And we can learn from other countries, but it helps if we're aligned in terms of the way we think about things and what is classified as sustainable lending or not.
Thank you, Ariff. That's a great point. And if we have more time, I would actually like to go a little bit deeper on that, because there are some different discussions happening in globally, and it would really be great to hear from AFI Network perspective as well. But now I actually want to move back to Sarah. You mentioned that climate effect is not gender neutral, and you have shared some of your research data. In your perspective, what are some of the solutions that central banks and regulators can bring into the table to actually advance more access to green finance by women?
So the first issue is a foundational one. There's a lot of theories and not a lot of numbers. So we really need to get granular about women's experiences, needs, and preferences on a global scale. And we need more evidence on the role of financial services in women's not just short-term adaptation and resilience, but long-term environmental stresses and how they impact women and women's responses to those stresses. So some questions that we have as researchers, as investors, are what sectors are women entrepreneurs leading or planning given climate change impacts? What financial services are most useful for women, especially in areas that are severely impacted by extreme weather events or with significant climate-related migration or displacement? And we need to know what policy actions are the most effective to help mitigate the effects of climate change. Once we quantify it, we can be smart about the solution design and how to direct our investments for the biggest impact. If we want to transform decision-making, we also need more women in decision-making roles. There's ample evidence about the benefits of gender diversity for profit-making, innovation, and for economic stability. In our own portfolio of companies, we've seen a clear positive correlation between having more women represented on the staff of an organization and serving more women clients, and specifically a correlation between having more women loan officers and service and outreach to women customers. There's also emerging research now showing that there's a correlation between women leaders, climate action, and sustainability. In terms of women entrepreneurs, women-led firms make more efforts to curb emissions and have better ESG results and higher ESG scores than other companies. What I think is fascinating is that despite this evidence emerging about the link between women's leadership and climate action, when surveyed globally, men are less likely than women to believe that women leaders will tackle climate change more effectively. So we've got some biases still to break down and work on. But specifically, regulators and policymakers can collect and analyze gender disaggregated data at the intersection of gender and climate. They can adopt a women-centered and evidence-based approach to how policies and regulations are designed and implemented, and create enabling environments for digital, regulatory, and physical infrastructure for low-income individuals, especially women, and develop partnerships with public and private sector entities to meet women's financial needs and address the underlying structural and societal drivers of the disproportionate effects of climate change on women. In terms of promoting women's leadership, regulators can set targets, recommendations, or mandates for women's representation in the entities that they regulate. We recently conducted some research on advancing women's leadership in Nigeria and found that among the key drivers of success in moving more women into top leadership roles was the Central Bank of Nigeria mandate requiring 30% minimum female representation on boards of commercial banks and 40% female representation on top management positions. In terms of financial service providers, there's a real need to design products and services with women at the center. Insurance for health, for agriculture, that really tackles resilience and adaptation issues. Giving women safe places to save so that their hard-earned savings are not washed away, literally, by climate disaster. And flexible credit products for women entrepreneurs that help to, like providing clean technologies, access to solar, so that women can play a key role in mitigation. And of course, access to digital financial services to make finance accessible to women. So really, all stakeholders in the financial ecosystem have a role to play in putting women squarely at the center of solution, policy, and product design.
Thank you, Sarah. Now I actually want to turn to Chairman of FRC Mongolia. So we heard from Ariff, what kind of support that is currently there, but also what are some of the areas that we would like to see more from the regulators. We also heard from Sarah what we can do to make sure that women also have access to a green finance. Now, Chairman, if you think about the audience here and the AFI network and the partners, what do you think the AFI network should do as a next step to move forward this inclusive green finance agenda?
So there is many things probably in order to have better access to green finance, in order to accelerate inclusive green finance for MSMEs especially. So Mongolia has high ambitions to further advance in sustainable finance agenda. So recently approved National Sustainable Finance Roadmap states the goal to increase the green loan portfolio banks 10% by the 2030. So in addition, there is recently banking law has been amended. In the accordance with the law, systematically larger banks needs to transform into public companies. In the 5 largest systematic banks which went public over the past year and made commitment to allocate 35% of the capital raised for the green loans. For instance, there is the standardized green finance products, creating, managing green technology database, aligned with the sustainable finance taxonomy, conducting stress tests in scenario analysis in climate-sensitive sectors, and developing methodology for the setting targets for greenhouse gas reduction for financial institutions. All are required to be completed. In order to implement above the measures, the exchange of international practices, particularly the events like we have in here, AFI events, it's significant. We still have a high need in the interest exchange insight on the inclusive green finance development. In addition, there are increasing opportunities for sustainable investments around the world. However, there is still constraints for private enterprise like MSMEs to enter the international market and access finance. Thus, we should work together to create sound framework of the public-private partnerships and the cooperation mechanism to enable access green finance for MSMEs. And I think indeed we should exchange the recent updates on the sustainable green developments more frequently to each other in every level. That's the way I think we should accelerate the international green finance in terms of to have a better cooperation, and also in order to not repeat the mistakes. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And one thing I take away, because yesterday we had the PPD discussion, the public-private dialogue, and maybe that's something that AFI Network can also take forward in how to have some partnership discussion on, at the PPD platform on inclusive green finance. Now, I want to turn to Governor from the Reserve Bank of Fiji, but this question is also really for all of you. So if you have any thoughts, feel free to share after the governor's intervention. So after listening to all this, Governor, and we know that the climate change COP is upcoming later this year, what would be your key message, especially if you think about how to scale the solution, how to scale inclusive green finance globally? What would be your main message to COP28?
Thank you. This morning I read on the online news that our Prime Minister is attending the COP28 and he'll be accompanied by the Leader of Opposition. And I'm pleased to say that this demonstrates that at least there's bipartisan support or collaboration on such an important matter like climate change. For those of you who do not know, Fiji co-chaired the COP23 that was hosted in Germany. So what would be my message to them? I have two messages, if I think. One is that, when we look at all the pledges and commitments that countries made over the last couple of, COP meetings, I would be interested to see or hear or know if there can be more transparency in what was committed or pledged and what was actually given. I think it would be good if this could be more disclosure in terms of whether countries have really walked the talk or just made pledges at the COP. So that's the first message. The second message, and I share this message, it's something that we in the Pacific Island countries have, when we met recently at the annual ADB meeting, as well as the annual IMF meetings, there's a dozen or so Pacific Island countries, and their common challenge is that access to funds from the Green Climate Fund has been very, very difficult. And so much so that it seems that the guidelines of the benchmark keeps changing. So the second message is, if these funds are actually for climate change. We in the Pacific know that we've been affected, and you saw the video that was played earlier. hopefully, access to these funds can be a bit more easier. I'm not saying that it should be just given away without any guidelines, but at least access to these funds that is very much needed if it could be made easier. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Governor. And I was going to ask all the panelists, but I also want to go deeper into your second point. And this is also what I have in mind when Ariff mentioned some of the standards. So it would be great to hear from our distinguished panelists today that we think about green finance, and I know this is also happening on the biodiversity side. The more developed this market would be, we'll start thinking about global standards, reporting requirements, compliance, and then it becomes more and more and more complicated. And sometimes then what the unintended consequence of that is, of course, we want to do that to avoid greenwashing and all these things. But in the end, the most vulnerable won't be able to access those finance because they don't have the capacity to comply to all that. So I think it's an interesting question for all of us to think about as central banks, regulators, private sector partners. How do we have this balance in one side, having good standards, compliance, reporting requirements, and all this, at the same time making sure that the finance can actually flow to those, oftentimes cannot comply those two requirements. I would love to hear any thoughts from the panel here.
Maybe I can start off on that. So I agree that, and kind of getting back to the point I was making earlier, it's very important to have those standards, right? For a project or an endeavor to qualify as sustainable lending or green financing, what are the thresholds that it has to meet? And those are very important, right? Because it establishes a clear threshold for companies or borrowers to meet. And B, it manages that threshold so it actually achieves something, right? You don't want to set it too low so that it's too easy, but there's no impact. At the same time, you don't want to set it too high where it's like an impossible goal to reach, right? And so establishing those are important. But getting back to also what you said about reporting and the challenges of reporting, and that's really an issue for us as well. I mean, BPI itself has issued green bonds, and we're a large institution, right? I mean, we're a bank with over 18,000 people employment at BPI. It's a fairly large institution, so we have the resources to do it, but it's not easy. And if it's not easy for an institution like ours, where we can easily tell somebody, this is your job, right? Then it's doubly not easy, and more than doubly not easy for a small institution where many people within the organization probably have more than one thing on their plate, right? They may be, for the SMEs, people have to double up. You're not just finance, you're not just marketing, you're kind of a little of everything. And in a situation like that, you really have to manage the reporting requirements. And again, if you talk to different agencies that provide this rating, it's also not always uniform across the board. So the faster that we can develop common and relatively simple reporting standards, I think it will really help develop the market for this, right? And I can just imagine, I mean, for us, we have the capacity to issue green bonds. We have the capacity to work with our customers and say, okay, in our minds, that's green lending, right? And then deal with, on our end, the rating agencies, the ESG rating agencies, and justify to them why it is. But I know that the SMEs that we work with don't have the capacity or the bandwidth to be doing something like that. So the simpler that we can make it, I think the more we will facilitate development in this sector, right? And I know it's easy for me to say that, and it's not always easy to do, but you know, I think that is something that will really contribute towards development of the sector.
Thank you. Appreciate the response. Any other thoughts from the panelists on how to strike this balance?
I would just say, what a challenge you've put on the table, and also an opportunity. If we're truly building something transformative, can we build it to be different? Can we engage the voices of the women, low-income women that are most impacted by climate change, the women MSMEs, and build a system that works for them, rather than retrofitting later those voices into the process?
Great, thank you. So if there are no more thoughts here, before I give one last word to the panelists, I would like to actually now turn to the audience, and it would be great to have any questions or comments that you have on the discussion we had, and in inclusive green finance in general as well. And I'm pretty sure if you raise your hand, there will be someone giving you the mic. So I see a hand here. And if you can identify yourself, that would be great.
Yeah. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Natalia Real Pecarrillo from EDERA Sustainable Solutions, and also member of the Research Advisory Council for Alliance for Financial Inclusion. On Tuesday, we were discussing at the Inclusive Green Finance Working Group how could central banks, regulators, integrate technology and, well, advanced artificial intelligence, quantum computing into their processes, so that it could be or accelerate the promotion of green financial regulation. And I would like to know from the panelists if you have any experiences, or if you have already thought about how could digital solutions help in your work, and help in those challenges that you have on standardization, definitions, classification. What will be your recommendations still to those 17% of institutions that are not yet working on green finance? And my second question is a reflection that we had in that group, that was, how can science, research centers, academia provide better inputs for your work? Is it, as in Bangladesh they were saying, the results from academia sometimes are illegible for us. So in your case, you're nodding. And so how can we help regulators better? In which formats, which speed? And if you have best practices to share to the consultants, researchers that are working here with the central banks.
Thank you so much. So I think there were two parts of the question, if I understood correctly. One on the use of technology, and second, how can research communicate, a research community can support the regulators better. So if anyone wants to answer to any of those two questions. Ariff?
I can take something on the first. I mean, at least give my input on the first, on the use of digitalization. I think from our perspective at BPI, we are on a digitalization journey ourselves. And I think, you know, in terms of digitalization of the financial sector here in the Philippines is actually a little behind some of the more developed countries. But we are in the process right now. And what we've really seen is that digitalization allows us to access another level of consumer, right? When you have to handle things on a manual basis, there's more work involved, and it's more difficult, and therefore the level of customer that you can afford to bank is higher, right? But as we engage in our digitalization initiatives, we're able to handle our customers more effectively, more efficiently. And what that does is it lowers the threshold for what is a customer worth banking, right? And I think that's one of the benefits to us as we really try to engage more people and engage in financial inclusion. And I think that works as well on the sustainability side. You know, as we try to broaden green finance to our customers, use of digitalization helps. And I'll just give one quick and easy example of that. I don't know if, especially those who are not from the Philippines are familiar with it, but our Department of Science and Technology has developed what they call Hazard Hunter, which is an application that helps determine the environmental risks that a certain location is subject to, right? So certain locations are subject to a higher risk of earthquakes or flooding or typhoons, depending on where you're located. And Hazard Hunter helps you determine what the risks of your specific location are. And we've seen good application for that for some of our customers in terms of helping them prepare for or mitigate some of the risks that they're subject to in their locations. And it's a very simple app. You know, you go to their site and you type in the location that you're in, and then it'll show it on the map, and then it'll show you as well what the risks are. And something as simple as that is helpful to our customers, because then they realize that, you know, I'm on an earthquake fault, or this area is especially prone to flooding. And then you can engage in mitigation actions, right? And so that's an example of how I think digitalization really helps in terms of, I guess, broadening the base of people that have access to this kind of information or tools.
Thank you. That's a great insight. Yes, Governor?
Recently, I attended a fintech boot camp in Singapore. And, you know, normally a normal commercial bank lends based on collateral and the ability to pay, or based on cash flow. There was a Malaysian fintech company that presented and has got a series of questions, psychometric questions. And basically, based on the responses of these questions, they're able to judge whether an MSME client will be able to repay. So they came up with the not ability to repay, but the intention to repay. So for MSMEs, the intention to repay is quite important. So this is Malaysian fintech company came up with psychometric questions. So based on the responses, they'll be able to say whether the intention is to pay. And so this is part of the science in all these things in terms of how it's developing. And I thought that was a great development in the sense that normally most banks will lend on your ability to pay, not on your intention to pay. But for SMEs, the intention to pay is equally important, if not more important.
Yes, go ahead.
So like on digitalization, like the private sectors always moves forward in a way is innovating new ideas, new technologies. So regulators, we are trying to not to fall behind of them. So like in Mongolia, we just a year and a half ago established the regulatory sandbox with the Central Bank of Mongolia. Within a year and a half, we received like more than 50 applicants. In the market, it's been approved through the board working group on the regulatory sandbox. So far on the market, it's like more than 7 new products, totally new products. That's somehow from our regulatory side, we enabling and supporting technologies in the financial sector.
Thank you. I think we have time for 1 or 2. Yes?
Hello, everyone. My name is Walid Ali. I'm from Central Bank of Egypt, and the former chair of the Inclusive Green Finance Working Group. Well, it's not actually a question, it's a comment, as the moderator asked if anyone has a comment. Well, it seems that we all agree in the room that all our countries in AFI are green. We are already green. So, so that's a fact that we need to put in mind while we are planning ahead. With the frequency and the pace of disasters in the last couple of years, it seems that the planet won't be waiting for us to finish our preparations. And let's agree as well that putting together policy or frameworks are not the goal. The goal is the implementation on the ground. If we took a look at the loss and disaster and loss fund that was announced in last COP27, Sharm el-Sheikh, my beloved country, the access to finance for this fund is a huge challenge for most of developing countries, if not all the countries. To wrap it up and summarize my point, I believe that Inclusive Green Finance Working Group and AFI in general need to focus on educating as well all the members about the adaptation approach. We cannot, as developing countries, go to the extreme with all the ideas of taxonomy and exclusion list and all of that, and wait to come up with the policies and frameworks without looking into the existing investments on the ground that we need to take care of, at least as the first priority, before looking into the mitigation efforts. Definitely it should be parallel, but I believe in our case, as developing countries, and the immediate actions needed from our vulnerable societies, then adaptation is the key. So we'd like to see that in the near future by the Inclusive Green Finance. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And it reminds me, I think, that we started with a challenge and a bit of a dire picture. I know we are facing a lot of challenges, but at the same time, we are hearing there are solutions. We have policy solutions, regulatory solutions, technological solutions, partnership solutions, and I think it's not the time to wait for a perfect solution, because we have to move on now. And I think what we're also hearing is there is a clear need for capacity building as well. Now, with some of these thoughts, I actually want to ask one last question to the audience. So there is one last poll left. And the question is, I know we have a lot of leaders here, but we also have technical experts, partners, different stakeholders. So regardless of that, if you have the authority as an individual to make inclusive green finance commitment through the Maya Declaration, would you make it or no? So you can go to the same app and you can press, it's in the, I think, if you go to poll, there is a second question there. Let me check. If you go out, if you click the session and if you click the polls, there is IGF Maya Declaration commitment question. Would you make a Maya Declaration commitment, if you can, if you have the authority, on inclusive green finance? A, we already made. B, yes, we are interested. C, no. Oh, the results already there. Great, so we already have it, and yes is the majority. So thank you. I think this panel did a great job. And I want to close with giving each panelist just one message that you want to say to end this conversation. Eric, do you want to start? And then we will end with the chairman.
No, sure. I guess from my perspective, just wanted to share that, you know, as a bank, BPI remains committed to green financing and sustainable financing. But, you know, it really is a collective effort. And so, you know, we appreciate the support that we've received from our regulator, but it is a growing process, and there's always ways to further develop or foster sustainable lending. So I guess that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
Yeah, if we want to scale inclusive green finance for MSMEs, let's work across the financial ecosystem to make sure that women MSMEs, women-led, women-owned SMEs have the tools, the resources, and the capabilities that they need to really be at the forefront of climate solutions.
Thank you. Governor?
Yeah. Just to stress that climate change is real, whether it's the fires in Hawaii, Canada, or Australia, the floods in India or Pakistan or Europe, and the typhoons in Philippines or the Pacific Islands. These natural disasters impact the SMEs more than anybody else. And given the significant contribution of SMEs to the economy, if more can be done for the SMEs, the better. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman?
I think there is always someone who's lacking the skills or capabilities in order to access the finance. So that's why we should concentrate on providing the opportunities, like helping them. So I have to say it in bigger terms, it's like, you know, financial literacy. It's the crucial part for the regulators in the public partnership as well. Thank you.
Thank you. So I believe no government, no country, no private sector, no individual, no NGO can thrive and be successful in a dying world. But we have heard all the solution, and I think together we can shift the course, and we look forward to the AFI network taking forward strong with your flag, the inclusive green finance. So thank you so much, everyone, and a big applause to our panelists.
Thank you very much, Ms. SungAh Lee, Deputy Director General of the International Union for Conservation of Nature. And once again, let's show our appreciation to our panelists. For this third panel, MSMEs in the face of climate change, how financial inclusion can turn the tables.